main bullet points. Obviously the financial statement audits, there's an official opinion that's made by a CPA or CPA firm that is basically giving assurance that the financial statements are materially accurate with the financial position of the organization. Risk mitigation. This is where, audits are being conducted to look at a process and to prevent fraud or errors. So think of things around segregation of duties, are the review and approvals working as designed? Legal compliance. This is, I think everyone's probably fairly familiar with. We're looking at compliance with contractual compliance that maybe banks require. We also look at regulatory compliance as well, let's say in compliance with the FAR. And also just grant compliance, what regulations are around with the grants. Stakeholder confidence. Stakeholders like to have an assurance that the information that they're receiving is accurate. So stakeholders could be anywhere from boards to senior leadership to the public, or even some of the customers that we're working for are all stakeholders within the organization. And then the internal controls. This is typically done within an internal audit department, typically, or this could be even outsourced. But to look at a process and verify not only is it effective in mitigating risks for the organization, but is it working efficiently as well? This is one of the areas that, sometimes I forget to make sure it's working efficiently and make sure we're not having too many controls that aren't adding value to the process and maybe just kind of mucking up things as well. So those are kind of the 5 main areas why audits are being conducted. Next slide, types of audits. So these are the main types of audits. Compliance audits, like we mentioned, contractual compliance. Banks are requesting for these types of audits. IRS are all making sure that you are meeting the laws and regulations, and also even just company policy. Operational audits, you're looking at, this is again done by internal auditors. You could be looking at a process. You could be looking at a customer on the internal controls and make sure those are performing efficiently and effectively. Forensic audits, those are typically can be controlled by either internal auditors, but also you could either have your ethics compliance could be working on these. These are maybe if someone has put in a hotline call to their to ethics hotline, forensic audit could be initiated at that point, depending on what the ethics call is. So, and then the financial statements that are audited. These do require to be done by an external auditing firm, and they must be licensed CPAs to make sure that the financial statements are in accordance with either GAAP or IFARS. So that's all I have kind of around the big, broad overview of why we're doing audits and the various types of audits that are out there. So Ben, I'll let you take over.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. And I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on the audits that most of us are the most familiar with. And this is pretty much financial audit. And what are the areas that usually we may be dealing with when we deal with the research administration management and facing auditors? So definitely general management. General management, it's a very broad area, and it would also apply to how our research administration is structured. For example, manager, supervisor, someone performing the actual research administration duties. So org charts are coming to place, but also a training of the employees responsible for research administration. And could be some other elements such as internal controls related to access, segregation of duties, our general procedures, like when do we close the books, how do we close them, accounting systems. In accounting systems, this part does not apply only to the actual system where everything takes place, but also overall how our processes are organized in conjunction with the systems. And also review of the quality of single audits. This part may apply more often to the smaller institutions. It really depends how the single audit is being performed and who is completing it. But it's also a very important area during the financial audit reviews. Allowable costs and cost principles. We are definitely very familiar with these terms coming directly from the uniform guidance and costs allowability, but also allocation, proper allocation, reasonableness, and how they are really necessary for completing the scope of work, and award cash management and payment testing. This area is really very familiar to the office that I manage, which is contracts and grants accounting, because we often receive requests from various organizations, federal agencies, with more questions about what is being used for our requests for payment, for billing. So definitely those of you that are working in the central contracts and grant accounting offices would have quite a bit of information about how this gets done. And sometimes it's at random. And often this is done based on a specific audit review of the award, and it comes into place when a smaller audit is being done. So what are the areas really that are being reviewed more often during those financial audits? We all are familiar with salaries and benefits expenses because this is really the largest expense for a majority of our projects. And there is really a huge scrutiny related to how they are being accounted for and reflected on our books. So in some cases, you may be asked, for example, for timesheets. This comes up often, but in other cases, more important could be even an appointment letter or perhaps a pay stub. And when it comes into salary rates, these would also be reviewed during those audits. When it comes to the fringe benefits, I do want to mention that it really depends how how an institution is organized. In our case, for example, we have composite benefits rates, and those rates are being compared every year to the approved agreement that we have with the rates for different group of employees. It's very important to have proper system adjustments completed timely so that those rates are charged the way they're supposed to be during each fiscal year. Timekeeping, very important. We want to make sure that timesheets are reviewed very timely and in fact by the authorized personnel. Procurement, suspension, and debarment. This is a very large area and includes many different aspects of it. For example, bidding process, when expenses exceed, when the procurement purchase exceeds certain amount, pay attention not only to the uniform guidance, but also to your own state regulations, because in some cases, like for example, in the state of California, we have to adjust it, and the limit for bidding process is lower for the state of California than it is specified in the federal regulations. Suspension and debarment is another issue, and it pretty much relates to the fact that in cases of fraud, for example, there is a website where companies are being listed, GSA website, and we are required to confirm in SAM.gov that we are doing business only with the institutions that in fact are not listed on this website. And this has to be completed timely, at least on annual basis. And procurement central offices are responsible for implementation of these policies. This will also be often checked. Equipment management, of course, you have to have proper system to track it. Inventory has to be completed not less often than every other year. Consultants, how are they being established? What paperwork is being completed? Subrecipient monitoring, we all know that the main institution, the prime funding recipient, This institution is actually responsible for all actions of subawardees. It's a big responsibility of the institution providing funds to other subawardees because we really have to review invoices very carefully and question certain expenses that could be unallowable. Participant support, big area, and very important because it's a restricted budget category. And if budgeted for participant support, in most cases, we would need to ask for prior approval would be required in order for rebudgeting of these funds into different budget category, different spending. Program income, indirect cost, it's first on my list. Definitely, we want to make sure that we have approved rates and we are using the correct rates. Program income doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's also not the easiest thing to manage. So please make sure that you are very clear when you have an award with the program income. You are very clear with how it's supposed to be managed because often departments may be lost and not familiar with this concept. And proposal pricing, this could be applicable to many areas. It's often applicable to contracts and really how cost and price are compared. And later, perhaps, if they cannot be justified well, there could be some reductions to the funds and disallowances. So improper payments, to go very quickly through this part, this is being checked often, and please remember that backup provided for the request, for your billing request, really clearly shows the dates and what was purchased, but also don't forget to apply credits because credits also need to be applied and refunded timely. I'm going to go to the next slide now. And what can we do to prepare for an audit? So, of course, policies in writing. We are all very busy, but it is very important to have something in writing. And I run into situations very often that I contact departments and everything that they are telling me is exactly what they should be doing, and they're doing it, except they have nothing in writing. So I get the fact that it's difficult to write it all down, and it does not have to be a long story with beautiful flowcharts, but put something in there in writing, the steps you are completing, so that maybe if you have to hire a newer employee or just to have something quickly because there is an audit and a deadline, you can present it to the auditor and ensure that actually you are doing whatever you wrote in those policies. They should be also posted on the website in some form, perhaps a summary, and make sure that you well define roles and responsibilities. System access and approvals, who is reviewing, who is approving, who is preparing, are these people trained? Do they really have direct responsibility in managing expenses and spending and also approving? Probably not. It shouldn't be happening. So all this has to be kind of organized, and it doesn't have to be in a form of a very fancy system. I realize that we have many financial constraints, and in some cases, partial process may be through the system implementation, but maybe we can do something in a simple way because we have a form and it doesn't happen often. Maybe investment in the system is not necessary. But definitely make sure that you have proper separation of duties and internal controls well defined, as well as the review of the ledger is taking place monthly. Personnel records, we all know this is a big audit component and always comes up in the very beginning. Effort reporting or payroll confirmation, depending what your institution is doing, usually is well organized by now. We kind of know what we're doing, so this could be supported better with some kind of system. Equipment management as well. We have to inventory our equipment and track it. And don't forget that if in fact you have any kind of error that happens, that there is a process in place that ensures that these corrections happen timely. Record retention, retain your records and also make sure that you know where to look for them when you are being asked for different documents. Have a list of people that have access, if you don't have this access to specific systems, so that you can retrieve these records in a timely manner and you retain them for the period of time that is required. And a big note to everybody, review prior audit findings. And the reason for this to being highlighted here is because these audit findings usually represent an opportunity for the next auditor, right? So when they are already aware of it, they will probably look into this area because it's a risky part of our activities.
I was going to back up just a slide there for a minute. I was going to make a comment. So obviously the prior audit findings, that's like the first thing on our to-do list when we're doing an audit is to see that they've mitigated, resolved those prior audit findings. But one other thing I wanted to also highlight there on system access, we're looking at, we've documented here on the approval process, but also be mindful when you look at that, hopefully on an annual basis, who has access to what systems and what rights they have, is that if there's been a change in personnel, make sure you've also removed those access rights as well, because that is something that I've seen often as a finding, is that when someone has either left the organization or they have a different role, they've maintained those access rights when they no longer need them. So make sure you look at that and make sure you only have the appropriate people to have access with the right type of rights to the systems. So thank you.
Thank you. And the next slide is very busy, but I included it here because I think that sometimes we just don't know where to start. And it's good to remember that there is a framework provided by the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, COSO, and it really provides certain like tables with different types of components that are included in the cube diagram that they provided, and they clearly show like what most likely we should be including in our internal controls in order to manage funds correctly, avoid fraud, and just have internal controls in place. So for example, this is just related to the costs, basic costs. There are different areas provided by the COSO framework. And for example, monitoring. And I included only the column where those components are described, like management reviews, supporting documentation of allowable cost information. So the next column in this kind of diagram would be for us, the supervisors, managers who actually are responsible for all of this, to describe how we are doing it in our institution. So using a chart like this to prepare for an audit would be a great idea, because those areas are already described. And once we define how we do it, we provide a copy of the process and we say, okay, these are people with the different roles, right? And here are the responsibilities. And this is the org chart, and this is how it flows down. So it's a different area, right, for central office and different priorities, and they have different roles. It is very important to remember that just having a few things ready, because this always comes up during uniform guidance audits, and just having them ready will really help and make you audit much faster. And make sure that whatever you are putting in there, you are actually doing, because later auditors will come and test whether or not what you are describing is happening in real life. So I'm not going to, there's different types of those tables, and the whole thing is to ask questions. These are the areas you should organize, and your internal controls have them ready. Once we define them, the next thing would be for the auditor to read it and assess the risk. So next slide is just to provide the highlight the steps of the process. And most of you are probably already familiar with, so it's just planning with an engagement letter. And then pay attention to the details of this letter. In a hurry, I always, not always, but sometimes I was so excited I got the letter that I missed like deadlines or timelines. Maybe not the deadlines, but like some kind of detail that you really want to know from the beginning. And plan it correctly based on this information. Then there is field work, reporting results after all the testing is already done, and then corrective action plan. So make sure that what you are putting in your corrective action plan is actually feasible and you can complete it, because there will be some audit follow-up, or if not, someone will review this audit, and based on the audit results, an auditor will see it as an opportunity to check this area because it's a risky area. So what are the frequently asked questions? This is just to provide an example. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they are very standard questions, and pretty much every auditor will provide a list. Some of them will ask for more details. Again, a lot of sentences start here with written policies, written something else. So just try to put things in writing. And this is my part of the presentation, and I'm going to pass it on to Stefan.
Thank you. Yes, we do love written policies and procedures. That's our real guideline of what we use as our scope to, as a what we're measuring to. So I was going to put in just a few slides here, about a dozen points of, how to ensure that we have a smooth audit going forward. Once you receive your announcement letter, notify the parties that will be involved within the scope, and let them know what their roles and responsibilities will be. And think of it as a project. Schedule a pre-meeting to make sure we define all of those and get everybody on board. Look at the timeline, ask them, what's their schedule looking? Do we need to, shift some projects or some tasks to others to accommodate the audit if need be? On the materials, review those before you submit them to the auditor. I've often have seen when we've had regulatory auditors come to do a review that we have sent them materials and it wasn't kind of looked over at first, and there was findings just because maybe our population of data that we provided wasn't accurate. So always kind of look at that before you send it to the external auditors. Designate an audit liaison. This can really help mitigate miscommunication taking place if there's lots of people that needs to be in this effort. I've seen the audit liaison kind of work in two different approaches. I've seen it to where the audit liaison will have their one resource contact with the audit team, and everything from data requests to questions and everything goes through the audit liaison. And the audit liaison will do all the gathering and working with everybody in the team to get that information. Now, depending on the audit scope and type, this could be a full-time job just in doing that potentially. So it really depends on the audit. Or I've also seen it where you have a kind of more of a team lead approach. So you have your audit team that's there, and you have your resources that's going to help, and you have the team lead of that group. And so they are not in every communication per se, but they are copied on every email communication, all data requests. So they know what's going on all the time. And if they start seeing a lag and stuff going on, they know who they need to reach out to be proactive and make sure things are flowing. So I've seen those two different approaches based on what works best for the organization or the team at the time. Allocate sufficient resources. Again, I know this is a challenge for everybody. We are all really slim. We are doing 2 jobs already. And also just, try to, if we can move tasks around, that'd be great, but that will help the audit overall finish a little more timely. Hopefully it can be done a little sooner if we can focus some resources around that and make sure it's always progressing. If we don't have sufficient resources, it's just going to drag it out even longer. So organize your documents that they're easy to read in the format and that they're easy to accessible. So I want to share on this is make sure it's a resource when you're sharing documents, that it's either something that's been approved by your organization that you can use, either like maybe ShareOne or Google Docs, whatever your organization has approved, or even the auditing firm may have their own resource that you need to upload that information to in doing their work. So next slide. Then the next one here is ensure timely response. So, ideally do it within 24 hours, but if you can do it within the same day, that's even better. So we're making sure there's progress ongoing all the time. Openly communicate to the audit team, what are some of the challenges that you may have. I can recall an instance. I was at a third-party audit and we were doing the kickoff meeting, and they knew that they were going to have some really serious resource challenges because they were planning on doing a pretty big layoff cut within the next week. And so they didn't tell us who it was, but they says, we have this in the works and just want to let us know and to be flexible. Or if the team currently has a really big time crunch commitment that they need to work with, let the auditors know in advance, and maybe they can readjust their audit approach to where you can finish off your commitments, and then they can work with your group at that time. So just ask them. They usually try to accommodate where they can. Sometimes they can't, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So understand your audit scope and objectives. So that goes obviously to the very first page, probably more, but make sure not only that you understand the audit scope and what the objectives are to it, but the team, your audit team, and their roles and responsibilities are around that. Make sure they understand that. If it's unclear, reach out to the auditors and make sure you understand what they're wanting to look at. Be aware of any regulatory changes or accounting standards. So hopefully you have a resource that periodically goes out there, or you get like a little ticker that says, oh, we've seen some upcoming changes that's taken place with GAAP or which is general accounting accepting standards, or even with maybe FAR, whatever different regulations you have to comply with. Make sure you are kind of staying abreast of those and looking at those periodically and making any necessary changes in your organizations as needed. Approach the audit as a collaborative effort. I think most auditors want to be very collaborative and work together, and are looking to, learn from you, as hopefully you can learn from us as well. So make it a collaborative approach, and unfortunately it's something, they're having to do a job as well, but I know you're having to do your job too, and this does add additional stress, and so we all are very mindful of that as well. And finally here, promptly review any audit findings that come your way and develop your corrective action plans. But I do want to note, when you're looking at an audit finding and you're going to develop a corrective action plan, get to the root cause of why that audit finding existed. If you don't get to the root cause and to design your corrective action plan around the root cause, you're likely to have repeat findings again because you didn't resolve the problem in the first case. So always kind of step back and look at, understand what the finding is about, and then, ask several questions. How did this happen? Why did it happen? And really define, is it a training challenge? Could it be that maybe we didn't have proper delegation of authority in place if some key person was out or something? So just look at that and make sure you design your corrective action around what the root cause is.
So I will jump in here from my experience sitting on the other side of the table usually when I have to face an auditor that it is really very important to be organized, but also have the right people in the room. So don't just invite people without meeting them earlier and talking through the whole project or process with them ahead of time, because sometimes people just maybe are not well trained and because they are newer and they don't even realize it. And this is really big institutional responsibility on their shoulders. It's not even fair to bring them into this situation. So just make sure you identify the right partners for this collaboration. And the other thing that I sometimes try to do, I mean, I always do it, but basically I try to say that I try to not say that I need more time, especially in the beginning, even though I feel that the timeline is very short. Maybe it's just my strategy. I'm hoping for the best. But I will usually just try to get as much as possible, deliver before the deadline, and then say, well, I still have a couple of things missing, and I will have it in a couple of days or whenever it's kind of possible for me to get them. Because I realize that auditors are busy, they have their calendar, they have their schedule, and they will be busy with what I give them. Maybe they will treat me better later, but this is just my strategy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was also want to mention around with, timely response. I mean, that's also so key to make sure things are moving along. Um, so yeah, that's key too, because there's so often times that make a request and we need some data and it just sits out there and we don't even hear back. We don't even know if they got the email. It's like if you need additional time to gather the data, just let us know so we kind of know when to anticipate it. So just wanted to throw out there, was there any questions or anybody have any comments of how you've had to work to make an audit smoother? If we don't have anything, we'll just move to the next slide. Oh, communication. That's a fun one. So, seems pretty self-explanatory, but there's still some struggles with this area sometimes when you're communicating with an auditor. First, let's go with, really try to remember key points. Be respectful, be honest, be transparent, provide them the information that they're requesting, but don't go off on areas that you don't have expertise on. So just try to answer the questions in a clarifying way. If you're not understanding the question, ask them. There could be just a different terminology of what we're asking for than maybe what your organization has termed something than what the auditors are looking for. So it could be just ask some clarifying questions to make sure you're answering the right questions. Things to really try to avoid, don't be defensive. The red flag goes up, if you're being defensive and disrespectful in any manner. Don't withhold any information that could bite you later on, because that's obviously another big red flag if that takes place and could involve into other things as well that nobody wants to get into, not even the auditors. So, but they're really typically there to work as a team. Other thing I want the key people to mention, recognize is like stay within the area of your expertise when you're asking questions. I've seen lots of times where people, and I understand that they may be nervous or they've never done this before, but try not to make any assumptions or make any assumptions of a role that's outside of what your expertise is. So don't be guessing, don't be making assumptions, just stick within the area that you have expertise in. And this could be even good just to share, with your audit team that's coming together, give them some guidance. Okay, if an auditor comes to you, be respectful, give them information you need. If you don't know the answer to their question, just tell the auditors you don't know the answer. That's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You'd rather say that you don't know than give some incorrect information. So, next slide. So some of the common issues we have identified in audits, and I think a lot of these are going to be pretty similar with lots of organizations, the lack of adequate documentation. So that one's the hard, because it is like everything else. It's document, document, document. Try to tell us a story in your documentation is what we're looking for. I've seen it being a real struggle of being able to support, say, your basis of estimates in your proposals that you're submitting. And that's a challenging one sometimes. So it's just being able to document all of that information. Monitoring and oversight of your subrecipients. This one can be a challenge too. I understand it's hard to do sometimes, but making sure that people who are responsible for oversight and the people who are like approving subcontractors' invoices are looking at those thoroughly. I've seen instances where subcontractors have purchased government equipment and weren't really notified in the proposal that they would be. And then they have government property that the main agency wasn't aware of that the subcontractor had. And so it took like a 2-year effort to get all that resolved and getting the equipment, out of stewardship and so forth. It took a lot longer to get that resolved. Overcharging indirect expense, obviously that can be really simple if you have multiple indirect charge codes or charge pools. Make sure you're applying the correct one to the applicable proposal or project. Unallowable cost. This is always a challenging one because so much of these unallowable costs are legitimate business expenses. You think you should be able to recoup all of your costs, say when you have to travel for business, but unfortunately so much of that is like if you can't find a hotel that's in the government per diem rate, you're automatically having to take a chunk of that into unallawables. Make sure you have a process that identifies that and can separate those types of costs out. Failure to obtain prior approvals from your customers. So mentioned here we have rebudgeting, but it could be, if you need to get prior approvals for them to work, staff to work overtime, I've seen, or even to do even travel. So make sure you get those prior approvals in place based upon what your contract is requiring. Also getting your prior approvals if you're needing to shift money around as well in the project to other cost areas. Inaccurate reporting, timekeeping, I think is a really big risk area, and making sure people are putting in accurate timekeeping records, especially when people are working on multiple projects that are supported by the government. They need to make sure they're recording their time accurately to those particular projects. So I'm going to jump down to the last one here, making sure that the participants in a program meet the eligibility requirements. So yeah, if we're not documenting how these people are eligible for these and we're not keeping good records, or if there is even, I've seen contracts that make a requirement that certain expertise is required to work on it, and we don't verify that they've got the certain graduate degrees and experience involved, that can be an issue as well. So I wanted to ask any questions, comments, or any other audit findings that's been a challenge? Okay.
I add from my side that it's really important to be curious how things get done in the institution if you are responsible for an audit. Because even if you have the right people in the room, often it's on this main person to answer a majority of the questions. So I try to not submit documentation that I really don't understand, and usually, and like, don't rush it. You still have a couple of days. Just look at it. Make sure that if someone looked at it totally from the outside, that this person actually can connect the dots, because we look at this information every day. So for us, it's very easy to understand it, right? We know how it's all structured for us. But just keep in mind that the auditor is looking at so many different outputs of financial information that you want to make it more helpful in a sense, just so the interpretation of the reviewer is correct and not, the conversation doesn't go in a strange way when in fact there's really no reason for it. So that's just kind of from my own experience. I try to make it easy for them, and actually during Ankura, one of the federal auditors, thanked me when we kind of ran into the same small group of people. So it was nice to hear.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I would have to say too, I feel like a good auditor should be willing to, I mean, if they're looking at something, they don't understand it real clearly, they need to go back and ask the questions around it. Because like you said, we're not familiar with your reporting structure and the reports that you have. And so we need to become familiar with it. And if there is a looks like there could be a finding or things just aren't, they should be going back to the business and asking, am I misunderstanding this? Could you make this clear for me so we understand? And it should be something, if there is a truly finding, the business and the auditors to come into agreement that, okay, yeah, this is true. This is an error that took place. And so a good auditor should be reaching back to the business to make sure they understand what happened as well. So,
there are a couple of questions in the chat.
okay, perfect.
You want me to read them to you, or do you want?
Yes, please.
Okay. First question, what would you consider to be sufficient documentation for subrecipient monitoring other than written policies?
Okay, so I can speak to this one. We are often being asked for copies of the invoices and evidence of the review of the expenses by the PI, and also research administration approval. And we even had questions. I had questions about, like, okay, who signed it? Because sometimes there is just initial, like, was this PI? PI should be reviewing all of these invoices. So review of the invoices and expenditures for sure. But also, I believe, depending on the subrecipient, for example, if it's corporate type of subrecipient, and then we may have to document how the PI decided on specifically this this subrecipient to be the one. We also had this question specifically, you might need to go to some.gov and make sure that you can do business with this person if it's not an FDP university, and check pretty much on the uniform guidance audit. It's more pre-award task, but that's a requirement. Before every year, subrecipient should be checked if their uniform guidance audits have been posted on the website.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention, again, it really kind of depends on the scope of like subrecipient monitoring. I've also seen it around other areas where, if we have concerns, we go on site and look at their stuff. We typically make sure in our contracts that we have the right to audit. And so depending on the contractor, every now and then you may need to do that periodically if it's a very big subcontract. Also just around, like, if they're going to be having government property, have we done the work to make sure they have an approved government plan? If not, do we know what their government plan is? Is their systems been approved by the government as well? So there's various areas based on the scope of the review around subrecipient monitoring, what needs to take place, just besides the policy and procedures. Also, when you have the policy procedures, they're going to be auditing to those as well, as along with any regulatory requirements too.
So there's a follow-up question to the subrecipient monitoring, and then there's also a question about participant support. So why don't I give you the subrecipient monitoring questions first, and then we'll go to participant support. Following up, to clarify, would the vetting of subrecipients in SAM.gov be the responsibility of the PI or the Central Sponsored Projects Office?
This would be central office responsibility. PI normally would not be checking it. But the PI is responsible for the expenses later and for the work to get done by the subrecipient. So, and research administrator actually can always say, we can't pay for this expense. Why are you charging it here? I personally rejected some expenses like this, and the revised invoices would be submitted. But for this specific question, I believe normally it would be up to the central office.
Yeah, you want to be keep constant that there should be a little bit of segregation of duties at some point. Maybe the PI is helping getting different bids from different contractors, but making the decision on who's being selected. They would have some input, but they do not make the final decision. There needs to be some separation there.
And then the question on participant support, can you further explain the participant support cost bullet? Are you referring to moving funding out of participant support without prior approval?
Right, so I can explain it. Participant support is restricted budget category. So for example, and it happens more often with the NSF funding. For example, out of 100,000 award, 10,000 is for participant support. So if we spend only 9,000 out of 10,000, this 1,000 unspent cannot be spent by the PI, for example, for equipment or travel that is not participant support travel. In order to spend these remaining funds, the PI needs to get a prior approval from the sponsor. It's a restricted budget category. It cannot be used for anything else unless approved. And if unused and not approved for something else, it's pretty much a reduction of the budget by this unspent amount. And also, there is all kinds of other restrictions that participants are not employees and specific categories like travel, subsistence. Usually this applies to like workshops and outsiders coming into institution and they attend an event, and this is applicable to this group of participants.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with all the comments you said there. Just make sure we get those prior approvals before we can move any cash out to some other activity that's not been approved.
Any other questions? Folks can also feel free to come off mute and ask those questions directly if you'd like.
We can move to the next slide just for fun too, while people are thinking about asking a question. So I just did some quick research the other day online. The next slide. Oh, there it is. Yeah, in the news. Yeah, just kind of want to highlight what's some of the stuff that's been in the news here recently, and just some general information like the GAO found 100.17 trillion of federal award funds spent from 2017 to 21 that were linked to severe and persistent single audit findings. So that's within 5 years. And the second one was really shocking to me, that they had 213 findings reported from 2015 and earlier that remained unresolved since 2021. So that's like a 7-year period of audit findings that have not been resolved. So that was quite surprising as well. So
this concludes our presentation.
yeah, any questions, be welcome. Or any comments. If anybody has some comments they'd like to include, or experiences that they have had with an audit. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So Vanessa, are you there? Do you I think she may have stepped away. So these slides and the presentation should be posted. I'm not sure how long it'll take, but they are going to be posted, and anybody who attended should be able to access those. I believe, is your contact information in the slide deck, Beata and Stephanie?
And we can add it in.
Okay. There's a question about where will they be posted. I believe the EPDC will send out a link to give you direct access to those. So thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the next Lunch and Learn.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Oh, there's a survey. If please check the survey link in the comments, and that way you can give us some feedback on our presentation, or on Stephanie and Beata's presentation. I didn't do anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.